I want to talk a little bit about Woolf's writing process with you. A few years ago, a really beautiful film was done based on a novel called The Hours. And it stars Nicole Kidman playing the role of Virginia Woolf. And this is simply the opening of the film. And I want you to think about, what is it that a writer needs? What is it that determines what theme you're going to write on a particular day? So this is her and her husband. Although she was in love with another woman for much of her life, she was officially married to Leonard Woolf, and the two of them were great collaborators and colleagues, as well as both being in the literary field and officially husband and wife. So here is the early morning, a little bit before lunch, between the two, Virginia and Leonard Woolf, and all the things that go into Virginia Woolf's decision about how to write the opening sentence. What you'll hear is the opening sentence of one of her most famous novels, Mrs. Dalloway. So here we are.
Good morning, Leonard.
Morning, Virginia. How was your sleep?
Uneventful.
Headaches?
No headaches.
Doctor seemed pleased.
That's all from this morning.
Yes. This young man has submitted his manuscript. I've found 3 errors of fact and 2 spelling mistakes. I'm not yet on page 4. You had breakfast?
Yes.
Liar. Virginia, it's not my insistence, it's your own doctor's. Better send Nellie up with some fruit and a bun. Right. Lunch, then. Proper lunch, husband and wife sitting down together. Soup, pudding and all. By force, if necessary.
Leonard, I believe I may have a first sentence.
Work, then. Then you must eat.
Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself.
Sally, I think I'll buy the flowers myself. What?
Wonderful little opening sequence that asks us a whole series of questions. It allows us to see how Woolf and her writing, in this case, the novel Mrs. Dalloway, continues to inspire women in particular who are drawn to literature and to the publishing industry and things like that. But it also invites us to think about, what do we need to know about a writer, what matters, and what determines their creation of that famous opening sentence about Mrs. Dalloway buying the flowers for herself. Do we need to know that the writer didn't want breakfast? Do we need to know that the writer was having writing block? Do we need to know that, although it's an unusual marriage, there's real care between Leonard and Virginia? Do we need to know, and I'm afraid it is a tobacco cigarette, do we need to know that she's smoking a hand-rolled tobacco cigarette as she's writing? And or do we need to know what pen she's using? I love that detail of choosing the pen. So sharing with you, this is my absolute favorite pen. It's an antique one. It's an antique silver pen from the mid-20th century. And it's one that every time I feel like I want to do something a bit distinctive with, I write with instead. Does it matter? Does it influence how I write that I have this pen that I'm particularly devoted to that's from New York City? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure it's a magic pen. But when I think about writing with this pen, It changes some of the way in which I approach the process of writing. Woolf, like Proust, is going to ask us to pay attention to ordinary things, very ordinary things, and in a framework that's a bit larger than just one small boy living in the city of Paris, although both of them connect to the same traumatic world event. This text, Proust's text, and the Borges text for Next Time are all very much about World War I. This is a war in which 188,642 English people alone were killed. The war to end all wars, an atrocity that no one could have imagined, taking place from 1914 to 1918. And she's going to write in the context of that war, but in some ways not about that war in the way that you might expect. So I want to jump into the text. This, and it's so exciting, this is a manuscript of one of Virginia Woolf's letters in her own handwriting that's in the Harry Ransom Center. You can go and take a look at it, see how she wrote, literally how she wrote with the pen that you've just seen her select in the film. And I'm going to use as a backdrop just for a little while this particular image, a Claude Monet image, and the crucial one for the gambit of the story. So I want to start us right at the very beginning with this unusual text. It's an unwritten novel. That is to say, it's a novel that never happens, and it's only a handful of pages. I could have given you hundreds of pages of Joyce's Ulysses, but instead I'm giving you 6 perfect pages of Virginia Woolf's unwritten novel. And so here is how her text begins. I'll be interested to know, please send me emails, tweet me or something like that, what you thought of it. The text begins, such an expression of unhappiness was enough by itself to make one's eyes slide over the paper's edge to the poor woman's face. Insignificant without that look, almost a symbol of human destiny with it. Life, what you see in people's eyes, life's what they learn, and having learned it never, though they seek to hide it, cease to be aware of what? That life's like that, it seems. 5 faces opposite 5 mature faces, and the knowledge in each face. So what on earth is she talking about there? One way of thinking about stream of consciousness writing is to say that it's not realistic. Another way of thinking about it is to say that it's telling the ultimate truth. When you think about what's going through your mind, are you actually having third-person omniscient narrative voice? Dr. R.G. is sitting at a table, looking out a window, recording a lecture. Or is what's really going through your mind, oh my goodness, I wonder if the audio is working. Did I actually eat the right thing for breakfast? Funny how that clip of Virginia Woolf reminded me of that. And oh my goodness, it's really cold today. I should have put slippers on. Isn't that odd, wearing slippers when you're giving a lecture? Surely I should be standing up in a large lecture hall and, oh dear, I wonder if one of the cats is going to come in. They've been so talkative today, and that would entirely ruin this, and then I'd have to re-record it, and I wouldn't make it to my graduate seminar. Which one is true? The first one, about me sitting at the table, sounds like a 19th century novel. The second one is actually what's going through my head. And you might take a moment to reflect now what's going through your head when nominally you're listening to what I'm saying. Like Hamlet, in particular, perhaps, even going back to Medea, Woolf here is telling us what's going through somebody's head at a particular moment in time. So what's the setting? It's very strange. Of course, crucially, because we're in the Western tradition, it's tragic. Everyone's unhappy and miserable. All right, we're accustomed to the Western tradition being about loneliness, about unhappiness, about suffering, etc., and that being something validated. But what is the deal with these faces? Why so many faces, and what's the paper's edge? So I have no idea. I would ask you if we were face to face, how many of you ride trains regularly? Trains are not like other modes of transit, and it's the core one here. So if you ride in an airplane, everyone faces towards the front. If you ride in a car, everyone faces towards the front, usually at least. Not a limousine, I suppose. Even in buses, people tend to face towards the front, or at least towards the sides. But in a traditional train carriage, what happens, and it could be a very long time, you could be on that train for 10 hours, not merely the couple of hours that she's on, because she's heading from London to the suburbs. What you end up doing is sitting with 2 rows of people facing each other, who meet each other in most cases, unless it's a group that are traveling together, who meet each other when they get on the train. And you're less than a meter apart, and you end up doing something that I'll suggest humans are very uneasy with. I'm sure I can give you an example of why. So When you get into the elevator, what do? I'm going to guess you turn around and look at the door. Why do you look at the door? Is it because you were so wondered whether the elevator is actually going to go to the 3rd floor? Is it because you wonder whether the 4th floor is after the 3rd floor? This is suspense. This is excitement. Oh, of course it's not. You look at the door so that you don't have to make eye contact with the other people in the elevator, or you look down at your phone. So nowadays, the way we do social distancing in the pre-COVID era is this way. I look at my phone. Therefore, I'm not making eye contact with you, and we can be really close to each other without being really uncomfortable. Part of what is necessary to be in a commuter society. No cell phones in the early 20th century and mid-20th century, but you did have a crucial object, and I'll just use the text that I have for today. What you had is a newspaper. And what she's doing at the beginning is being fascinated by the people sitting across from her and not wanting quite to look at them in the eye. She keeps peering around the edge of her newspaper, trying to catch a glance at her co-travelers without creeping them out by seeming to look at them. She doesn't tell us what she's doing. She lets us feel in real time what her consciousness is experiencing. And then she starts imagining things. As if she'd heard me, she says on 2739, she looked up, shifted slightly in her seat and sighed. She seemed to apologize at the same time to say to me, if only you knew. I'm going to stop just there. So presumably she does shift slightly in her seat. But then there's no apology given. Woolf is already making stuff out. She's telling us things. The woman moved in her seat, but she's making things up because it's more interesting that way. And then she actually creates dialogue that doesn't happen, as if to say to me, if only you knew. Then she looked at life again. What does looking at life mean? She presumably looks at some other thing that's in the train car. But I do know. I answered silently. Again, the narrator never says this sentence. She just imagines, what would it be like if the woman was saying things to me and I was in a conversation with her, a serious philosophical one. But I do know I answered silently, glancing at the times for manners' sake. So she realizes she's staring too much at the woman, so she goes back to her newspaper, breaking the eye contact so as not to be uneasy. And then an important detail, what's in the London Times, the newspaper that she's reading? It's crucial. Peace between Germany and the Allied powers was yesterday officially ushered in at Paris. The headline in the newspaper is arguably the largest event, maybe in fact of the 20th century, but certainly of the early 20th century and of Woolf's life. That brutal, annihilating war, which shook not only all the lives that were destroyed by it, but the very image of what